H.M. sloop Sophie of Barcelona. Sir, I have the honor to acquaint you that the sloop I have the honor to command, after a mutual chase and a warm action, has captured a Spanish xebec frigate of 32 guns, 22 long 12-pounders, 8 9s, and 2 heavy carronades, viz. The Cacafuego, commanded by Don Martin de Langara, manned by 319 officers, seamen, and marines. The disparity of force rendered it necessary to adopt some measure that might prove decisive. A resolve to board, which being accomplished almost without loss, after a violent close engagement, the Spanish colors were obliged to be struck. I have, however, to lament the loss of Lieutenant Dillon, who fell at the height of the action, leading his boarding party, and of Mr. Ellis, a supernumerary, while Mr. Watt, the boatswain, and 5 seamen were severely wounded. To render just praise to the gallant conduct and impetuous attack of Mr. Dillon, I am perfectly unequal to. I saw him for a while, Stephen had said. I saw him through that gap where 2 ports were beaten into one. They were fighting by the gun. And then when you called out at the head of those stairs into the waist, and he was in front, black faces behind him, I saw him pistol a man with a pike, pass his sword through a fellow who had beaten down the boatswain and come to a red coat, an officer. After a couple of quick passes, he caught this man's sword on his pistol and lunged straight into him. But his sword struck on the breastbone or a metal plate and doubled and broke with the thrust. With the 6 inches left, he stabbed him faster than you could see. Inconceivable force and rapidity. You would never believe the happiness on his face, the light on his face. I must be permitted to say that there could not have been greater regularity, nor more cool, determined conduct shown by men than by the crew of the Sophie. The great exertions and good conduct of Mr. Pullings, a past midshipman and acting lieutenant whom I beg to recommend to their lordships' attention, and of the boatswain, carpenter, gunner, and petty officers I am particularly indebted for. I have the honor to be, etc. Sophie's force, at commencement of action, 54 officers, men and boys, 14 4-pounders, 3 killed and 8 wounded. Cacafuego's force at commencement of action, 274 officers, seamen, and supernumeraries, 45 marines, guns, 32. The captain, boatswain, and 13 men killed, 41 wounded. He read it through changed. I have the honor. On the first page, too, I have the pleasure, signed it J.N.O. Aubrey, and addressed it to M. Hart, Esquire, not to Lord Keith Alas, for the Admiral was at the other end of the Mediterranean, and everything passed through the hands of the Commandant. It was a passable letter, not very good for all his efforts and revisions. He was no hand with a pen. Still, it gave the facts, some of them, and apart from being dated off Barcelona in the customary way, whereas it was really being written in Port Mahon the day after his arrival, it contained no falsehood, and he thought he had done everyone justice. Had done all the justice he could, at least, for Stephen Maturin had insisted upon being left out. But even if it had been a model of naval eloquence, it would still have been utterly inadequate, as every sea officer reading it would know. For example, it spoke of the engagement as something isolated in time, coolly observed, reasonably fought, and clearly remembered, whereas almost everything of real importance was before or after the blaze of fighting. And even in that he could scarcely tell what came first. As to the period after the victory, he was unable to recapture the sequence at all, without the log. It was all a dull blur of incessant labor and extreme anxiety and weariness. 300 angry men to be held down by 24, who also had to bring the 600-ton prize to Minorca through an ugly sea and some cursed winds. Almost all the sloops standing and running rigging to be set up anew. Masts to be fished, sought yards shifted, fresh sails bent, and the boatswain among the badly wounded. That hobbling voyage along the edge of disaster with precious little help from the sea or the sky, a blur and a sense of oppression, a feeling more of Cacafuego's defeat than the Sophie's victory, an exhausted perpetual hurrying, as though that were what life really consisted of. A fog punctuated by a few brilliantly clear scenes. Pullings, there on the bloody deck of the Cacafuego, shouting in his deafened ear that gunboats were coming down from Barcelona. His determination to fire the frigates undamaged broadside at them, his incredulous relief when he saw them turn on last and dwindle against the threatening horizon. Why? The sound that woke him in the middle watch, a low cry mounting by quarter tones or less and increasing in volume to a howling shriek. then a quick series of spoken or chanted words, the mounting cry again, and the shriek. The Irishmen of the crew waking James Dillon stretched there with a cross in his hands and lanterns at his head and his feet. The burials, that child Ellis in his hammock, with the flag sewed over him, looked like the little pudding, and now, at the recollection, his eye clouded again. He had wept, his face streaming with tears as the bodies went over the side and the Marines fired the volley. Dear Lord, he thought, dear Lord, for the rewriting of the letter and his casting back off his mind brought all the sadness flooding up again. It was a sadness that had lasted from the end of the action until the breeze had died on them some miles off Cape Mola, and they had fired urgent guns for a pilot and assistance, a sadness that fought a losing battle against invading joy, however. Trying to fix the moment, when the joy broke through, he looked up, stroking his wounded ear with the feather of his pen, and through the cabin window he saw the tall proof of his victory at her moorings by the yard. Her undamaged larboard side was towards the Sophie, and the pale water of the autumn day reflected the red and shining gold of her paintwork, as proud and trim as the first day he had seen her. Perhaps it was when he received the first unbelieving, amazed congratulations from Sene of the Bellerophon, whose gig was the first boat to reach him. Then there was Butler of the Nead, and young Harvey, Todd Widrington, and some midshipmen, together with Marshall and Mowat, almost out of their minds with grief at not having taken part in the action, yet already shining with reflected glory. Their boats took the Sophie and her prize in tow. Their men relieved and the exhausted Marines and idlers guarding the prisoners. He felt the accumulated weight of those days and nights come down on him in a soft, compelling cloud, and he went to sleep in the midst of their questions, that marvelous sleep, and his waking in the still harbor to be given a quick unsigned note and a double cover from Molly Hart. Perhaps it was then. The joy, the great swelling delight was certainly in him when he woke. He grieved, of course. He grieved bitterly for the loss of his shipmates, would have given his right hand to save them, and mixed in his sorrow for Dillon. There was a guilt whose cause and nature eluded him, but a serving officer in an active war has an intense rather than a lasting grief. Sober, objective reason told him that there had not been many successful single-ship actions between quite such unequal opponents, and that unless he did something spectacularly foolish, unless he blew himself as high as the Boyne, the next thing that would reach him from the Admiralty would be the news of his being gazetted, of his being made a post-captain. With any kind of luck, he would be given a frigate, and his mind ran over those glorious hybrid ships, Emerald, Seahorse, Terpsichore, Phaeton, Sibyl, Sirius, the lucky Athalion, Naiad, Alcmene, and Triton, the flying Thetis, Endymion, San Fiorenzo, Amelia, dozens of them, more than 100 in commission. Had he any right to a frigate? Not much. A 20-gun post ship was more his mark, something just in the sixth rate. Not much right to a frigate. Not much right to set about the Cacafuego either, nor to make love to Molly Hart. Yet he had done so, in the post-chaise in a bower, in another bower, all night long. Perhaps that was why he was so sleepy now, so apt to doze, blinking comfortably into the future as though it were a sea-coal fire. And perhaps that was why his wounds hurt so. The slash on his left shoulder had opened at the far end. How he had come by it, he could not tell. But there it was after this action, and Stephen had sewn it up at the same time. He dressed the pike wound across the front of his chest, one bandage for the two, and clapped a sort of dressing on what was left of his ear. But dozing would not do. This was the time for riding in with a tide of flood, for making a dash for a frigate, for seizing Fortune while she was in reach, running her aboard. He would write to Queenie at once, half a dozen letters more than afternoon before the party, perhaps to his father too. Or would the old boy make a cock of it again? He was the worst hand imaginable at plot, intrigue, or the management of what tiny amount of interest they had with the grander members of the family, should never have reached the rank of general by rights. However, the public letter was the first of these things, and Jack got up carefully, smiling still. This was the first time he had been openly ashore, and early though it was, he could not but be conscious of the looks, the murmurs, and the pointing that accompanied his passage. He carried his letter into the commandant's office, and the compunction, the stirrings if not of conscience or principle, then at least of decency, that had disturbed him on his way up through the town and even more in the anteroom, disappeared with Captain Hart's first words. "Well, Aubrey," he said, Without getting up, we are to congratulate you upon your prodigious good luck again. I collect." "You are too kind, sir," said Jack. "I have brought you my official letter." "Oh, yes," said Captain Hart, holding it some way off and looking at it with an affectation of carelessness. "I will forward it presently. Mr. Brown tells me it is perfectly impossible for the yard here to supply half your wants. He seems quite astonished that you should want so much. How the devil did you contrive to get so many spars knocked away, and such a preposterous amount of rigging? Your sweeps destroyed. There are no sweeps here. Are you sure your boatswain is not coming in a trifle high? Mr. Brown says there is not a frigate on the station, nor even a ship of the line, that has called for half so much a cordage. If Mr. Brown can tell how to take a 32-gun frigate without having a few spars knocked away, I shall be obliged to him. Oh, in these sudden surprise attacks, you know. However, all I can say is you will have to go to Malta for most of your requirements. Northumberland and the Superb have made a clean sweep here. It was so evidently his invention to be ill-natured that his words had little effect, but his next stroke slipped under Jack's guard and stabbed right home. Have you written to Ellis people yet? This sort of thing, tapping the public letter, is easy enough. Anyone can do this, but I do not envy you the other. What I shall say myself I don't know, biting the joint of his thumb, and he darted a furious look from under his eyebrows, and Jack had a moral certainty that the financial setback, misfortune, and disaster, or whatever it was, affected him far more than the debauching of his wife. Jack had, in fact, written that letter, as well as the others, Dillon's uncle, the seamen's families, and he was thinking of them as he walked across the patio with a somber look on his face. A figure under the dark gateway stopped, obviously peering at him. All Jack could see in the tunnel through to the street was an outline and the two epaulets of a senior post captain or a flag officer. So although he was ready with his salute, his mind was still blank when the other stepped through into the sunlight, hurrying forward with his hand outstretched. "Captain Aubrey, I do believe." "Keats of the Superb. My dear sir, you must allow me to congratulate you with all my heart. A most splendid victory indeed. I have just pulled round your capture in my barge, and I am amazed, sir, amazed. Was you very much applaud? May I be of any service, my boatswain, carpenter, sailmakers? Would you do me the pleasure of dining aboard, or are you bespoke? I dare say you are. Every woman in Mahon will wish to exhibit you such a victory." "Why, sir, I thank you most heartily," cried Jack, flushing with undisguised, open, ingenuous pleasure in returning the pleasure of Captain Keats, and with such vehemence as to cause a dull crepitation followed by a shattering dart of agony. "I'm infinitely obliged to you for your kind opinion. There is none I value more, sir. To tell you the truth, I am engaged to dine with the governor, and to stay for the concert. But if I might beg the loan of your boatswain on a small party. My people are all most uncommon weary, quite fagged out. Why, I should look upon it as a most welcome indeed, a heaven-sent relief." "It shall be done. Most happy," said Captain Keats. "Which way do you go, sir, up or down?" "Down, sir. Have appointed to meet a person at the Crown." "Then our ways lie together," said Captain Keats, taking Jack's arm. As they crossed the street to walk in the shade, he called out to a friend, "Tom, come and see who I have in tow. This is Captain Aubrey of the Sophie. You know Captain Grenville, I am sure." "This gives me very great pleasure," cried the grim, battle-scarred Grenville, breaking out into the one-eyed smile. He shook Jack by the hand and instantly asked him to dinner. Jack had refused 5 more invitations by the time he and Keats parted at the Crown. From mouths he respected he had heard the words, "As neat an action as ever I knew. Nelson will rejoice in this, and if there is justice on earth, the frigate will be bought by the government and Captain Aubrey given command of her." He had seen looks of unfeigned respect, goodwill, and admiration upon the faces of seamen and junior officers passing in the crowded street. And 2 commanders senior to him, unlucky in prizes and known to be jealous, had hurried across to make their compliments handsomely and with good grace. He walked in, up the stairs to his room, threw off his coat and sat down. "This must be what they call the vapors," he said, trying to define something happy, tremulous, poignant, church-like, not far from tears in his heart and bosom. He sat there. The feeling lasted indeed, grew stronger. When Mercedes started and he gazed at her with a mild benevolence, a kind and brotherly look, she darted in, squeezed him passionately, and uttered a flood of Catalan into his ear, ending, "Brave, brave Captain, good, pretty, and brave." Thank you, merci, dear." I am infinitely obliged to you. Tell me, he said, after a decent pause, trying to shift to an easier position. A plump girl, a good 10 stone. Diga me, would you be a good creature, bona creatura, and fetch me some iced negus, sangria colda. Thirst, soif, very thirst, I do assure you, my dear. Your auntie was quite right, he said, putting down the beaded jug and wiping his mouth. The Venero's ship was there to the minute, and we found the false Ragusan. So here a qui is auntie's reward, the recompenso de tua tia, my dear, pulling a leather purse out of his breeches pocket. Iaki, bringing out a neat sealing waxed packet, is a little regalo para vous, sweetheart. Present, cried Mercedes, taking it with a sparkling eye, nimbly undoing the silk, tissue paper, jewels, cotton, and finding a pretty little diamond cross with a chain. She shrieked, kissed him, darted to the looking-glass, shrieked some more, eek, and came back with the stone flashing low on her neck. She pulled herself in below and puffed herself out above, like a poter pigeon, and lowered her bosom, the diamonds winking in the hollow, down towards him, saying, You like him! You like him! You like him! Jack's eyes grew less brotherly. Oh, far less brotherly. His glottis stiffened and his heart began to thump. Oh, yes, I like him, he said hoarsely. Timely, sir. Bosun of the Superb, said a tremendous voice at the opening door. Oh, beg pardon, sir. Not at all, Mr. Timely, said Jack. I am very happy to see you. And indeed, perhaps it was just as well, he reflected, landing again at the rope-walk stairs, leaving behind him a numerous body of skillful, busy Superbs rattling down the newly set-up shrouds, there being so much to do. But what a sweet girl it is! He was now on his way to the governor's dinner. That at least was his intention. But a bemused state of mind swimming back into the past and onwards into the future, together with a reluctance to seem to parade himself in what the sailors called the High Street, brought him by obscure back ways filled with the smell of new fermenting wine and purple guttered with the lees to the Franciscan church at the top of the hill. Here, summoning his wits into the present, he took new bearings, and looking with some anxiety at his watch, he paced rapidly along by the armory, past the green door of Mr. Florey's house with a quick upward glance, and headed northwest by north for the residence. Behind the green door, and some floors up, Stephen and Mr. Florey were already sat down to a haphazard meal, spread wherever there was room on odd tables and chairs. Ever since coming back from hospital, they had been dissecting a well-preserved dolphin, which lay on a high bench by the window next to something covered by a sheet. Some captains think it the best policy to include every case of bloodshed or temporary incapacity, said Mr. Florey, because a long butcher's bill looks well in the Gazette. Others will admit no man that is not virtually dead, because a small number of casualties means a careful commander. I think your list is near the happy mean, though perhaps a trifle cautious. You are looking at it from the point of view of your friend's advancement, of course. Just so. Yes. Allow me to give you a slice of this cold beef. Pray reach me a sharp knife. Beef, above all, must be cut thin if it is to savor well. There is no edge on this one, said Stephen. Try the catling. He turned to the dolphin. No, he said, peering upper under a flipper. Where can we have left it? Ah, lifting the sheet. Here is another. Such a blade. Swedish steel, no doubt. You began your incision at the Hippocratic point, I see, he said, raising the sheet a little more and gazing at the young lady beneath it. Perhaps we ought to wash it, said Mr. Florey. Oh, a wipe will do, said Stephen, using a corner of the sheet. By the way, what was the cause of death, he asked, letting the cloth fall back. That is a nice point, said Mr. Florey, carving a first slice and carrying it to a griffin vulture tied by the leg in a corner of the room. That is a nice point, but I rather incline to believe that the battering did her business before the water. These amiable weaknesses, follies, yes. Your friend's advancement. Mr. Florey paused, gazing at the long, straight, double-edged catling and waving it solemnly over the joint. If you provide a man with horns, he may gore you, he observed with a detached air, covertly watching to see what effect his remark might have. Very true, said Stephen, tossing the vulture a piece of gristle. In general, venum habent in cornu, but surely, he said, smiling at Mr. Florey, you are not throwing out a generality about cuckolds. Do not you choose to be more specific, or do you perhaps refer to the young person under the sheet? I know you speak from your excellent heart, and I assure you no degree of frankness can possibly offend. Well, said Mr. Flory, the point is that our young friend, I may say, for I have a real regard for him, and look upon this action as reflecting great credit upon the service, upon us all. Our young friend has been very indiscreet, so has the lady. You follow me, I believe. Oh, certainly. The husband resents it, and he is in such a position that he may be able to indulge his resentment. Unless our friend is very careful, most uncommon cautious, the husband will not ask for meeting, for that is not his style at all. A pitiful fellow, but he may try to entrap him into some act of disobedience and to bring him to a court-martial. Our friend is famous for his dash, his enterprise, and his good luck rather than for his strict sense of subordination. And some few of the senior captains here feel a good deal of jealousy and uneasiness at his success. What is more, he is a Tory, or his family is. And the husband and the present First Lord are rabid Whigs, vile ranting dogs of Whigs. Do you follow me, Dr. Maturin? I do indeed, sir, and I'm much obliged to you for your candor in telling me this. It confirms what was in my mind, and I shall do all I can to make him conscious of the delicacy of his position. Though upon my word, he added with a sigh, there are times when it seems to me that nothing short of a radical ablation of the membrum virile would answer in this case. That is very generally the peccant part, said Mr. Flory. Clerk David Richards was also having his dinner, but he was eating it in the bosom of his family. As everyone knows, he told the respectful throng the captain's clerk's position is the most dangerous there and is in a man of war. He is up there all the time on the quarter-deck with his slate and his watch to take remarks, next to the captain, and all the small arms and a good many of the great guns concentrate their fire upon him still. There he must stay, supporting the captain with his countenance and his advice. Oh, Davy, cried his aunt, and did he ask your advice? Did he ask my advice, ma'am? Ha ha! Upon my sacred word. Don't swear, Davy dear, said his aunt automatically. It ain't genteel. La, Mr. Richards Bach, says he, when the maintop begins to tumble about our ears, tearing down through the quarter-deck splintered netting like so much Berlin wool, I don't know what to do. I'm quite at a loss, I protest. There's only one thing for it, sir, says I. Boredom, fore and aft, and I give you my sacred word, the frigate's ours in 5 minutes. Well, ma'am, and cousins, I do not like to boast, and I confess it took us 10 minutes, but it was worth it, and for it won us a copper-fastened new sheathed Xebec frigate as I have seen. And when I came aft, having dirked the Spanish captain's clerk, Captain Aubrey shook me by the hand, with tears in his eyes. Richard, says he, we ought all to be very grateful to you, says he. Sir, you are very good, says I, but I have done nothing but what any taught captain's clerk would do. Well, says he, 'tis very well. He took a draught of porter and went on. I very nearly said to him, I tell you what, Goldilocks, for we call him Goldilocks in the service, you know, in much the same way as they call me Hellfire Davy or Thundering Richards. Just you rate me midshipman aboard the Cacafuego when she's bought by the government, and we'll cry quits. Perhaps I may tomorrow, for I feel I have the genius of command. She ought to fetch 12 pound 10, 13 pound a ton. Don't you think, sir, he said to his uncle. We did not cut up her hull a great deal. Yes, said Mr. Williams slowly. If she was bought in by government, she would fetch that and her stores as much again. Captain A would clear a neat 5 thou apart from the head money, and your share would be, let's see, 263.14.2, if she was bought by government. What do you mean, Nunky? What with your if? Why, I mean with that a certain person does the admiralty buying, and a certain person has a lady that is not over shy, and a certain person may cut up horrid rough. Oh, Goldilocks, Goldilocks, wherefore art thou, Goldilocks? Asked Mr. Williams to the unspeakable amazement of his nieces. If he had attended to business instead of playing Yardo, the parish bull, it was she has set her bonnet at him, cried Mrs. Williams, who had never yet let her husband finish a sentence since his I will at Trinity Church, Plymouth Dock, in 1782. Oh, the minx, cried her unmarried sister, and the niece's eyes swung towards her wider still. The hussy, cried Mrs. Thomas. My Paquita's cousin was the driver of the shay. She came down to the Quay Inn, and you would never credit. She should be flogged to the town at the cart's tail, and don't I wish I had the whip. Come, my dear. I know what you are thinking. Mr. W. cried his wife. And you are to stop it this minute. The nasty cat, the wretch.